We began the piece with a very simple concept of a line drawn, and that line giving a direction to a simple movement. This was our starting point, and lines drawn across the paper and therefore across the backdrop became a recurring theme in the piece, each time taking on a different intensity or meaning. In starting this way, we also established a very direct and clear relationship between the dancer, the drawing hand, and the image left on the page. When we witness the drawing of a line, we also witness the time it takes to draw that line, and we notice the tone, the quality of voice of that line. Following this simple beginning, the next exploration was, in a sense, a mimicking of dance through drawing. The hand of the artist and the movements of the hand worked in direct relationship with the solo dancer, and the lines and colours across the backdrop added a third element, a dynamic creation of space and place, one where the dancer could merge into the projection or stand out in the spaces left by the drawing. In this section, the artist was choosing rhythmically when to intervene, much as two dancers would improvise together, each listening to the other. While lines are still present here, they've become curves and squiggles, fragments, much like the sped-up voice of the soundtrack we used. In a previous piece of work, forerunner to Perfect World, called Half Perfect World, David and I had discovered the use of black as a way to almost erase the dancer in the projection. Here is a fragment from that earlier work where we used black not only to erase the dancer, but also to use the particular quality of the single colour, and in this case, the darkness and heaviness of black. For all that we were using digital cameras for projection, one of the strengths, I think, of this work was the analog solutions we found for different moments during the piece, such as transitions from one section to another. Here, the movement seen is the sliding of the paper off the table. We discovered that we could use mechanical aspects of changing sheets of paper, for example, to theatrical effect. Here, the drawing became almost like a sinking ship, a strange sense of reality sliding away. And the build-up of sheets of paper at the side of the table where David was working became a residue of everything that had transpired during the piece. In our setup, we had an overhead camera, which of course shows the hand very clearly. We also had a camera underneath the table, which had a perspex top. This meant that we could, to some extent at least, disembody the moving drawings. In this duet, the shadowy, slow drawing of curving, winding lines set up an underscore for the themes of the relationship, which, loosely, had the feel of a relationship coming to an end, the shadowy places of silence when there's just not that much more to say. From there we went on to another dance duet, this time one of peers and perhaps a certain rivalry. In this duet we returned to the use of drawing straight lines, initially as a way to transition from the previous duet a single line, and then a crisscrossing of lines creating spatial tension. David Mays was already someone who draws with his whole body. His physical engagement with the act of drawing is a dance in itself, and the sense of keeping a certain tension and energy in the relationship between the artist's body, the paper, and the other materials involved is in itself a performative act. As you saw in the extract from Half Perfect, we'd experimented with the hand making a gesture almost touching the onstage performer. Here, the combination of the melancholy blue, the sensuality of the touch, the wetness, the dirty fingernails, all lend a certain intimacy to a solo about inner states of anxiety, the messiness of the hypersensitive soul, and a certain dissolving of the separation between artist and materials also increased that sense of intimacy. What came next was a shift from everything that had gone before. The drawing up until now had been abstract, based on movement, responding to and directing the movement of the dancers, creating tension and harmony, accompaniment, as well as having its own distinctive voice. In this section, the drawing slowly revealed itself to be something recognizable: a tree. A tree is loaded with narrative. If I ask you to think about a particular tree, your mind will go somewhere quite tangible. In the painting of a tree, we created a very specific place to be inhabited by the performers. Here there was a distinct shift too in how we created the material for the duet. Perfect World throughout used a combination of improvised sections and set material. Here the material was set, bearing in mind the context of the drawing of a tree and the notion of the passing of time. We also maintained a connection to the way the drawing was being made live through specific choices about movements, which took on some of the abstractions of tree branches intertwining and leaves fluttering in the wind. In this sense, the dance became more abstract in the light of a more narrative and recognizable drawing. In one of our few digital transitions, we took advantage of the flickering of a tape rewind to make the tree disappear and allow David to set up a clean page. Somewhere between the tree and the abstract movement drawings comes the next section, which was something of an exercise in figure drawing. We used a set sequence of static poses taken up by the dancer, each to be sketched fairly quickly and roughly by David, making then a sequential drawing, somewhat reminiscent of more clinical drawings of anatomy and motion, or the early use of still photography frames that led to the invention of motion pictures. There was something eminently satisfying in the witnessing of the drawing of these poses and in seeing so very clearly the origin of the drawing. We thought too about the traces left behind in the retina and memory when watching dance, and here, in contrast to that, this very tangible record of those forms that the dancer has taken up. We had previously filmed the dancer doing the same sequence against a blank background, and this pre-recorded video was played backwards once the drawing was completed, almost creating the illusion that the dancer could rewind themselves. We didn't quite achieve that level of realism, and in this version the dancer took on a rather ghostly appearance, which perhaps wasn't exactly what we were aiming for. However, again, the sensation watching this was very satisfying, magical almost, in spite of the trick being so transparent. We could see again so clearly how those lines fitted so beautifully with the movements of the dancer, and understand at the same time that had we just seen the finished drawing alone outside of this context, none of those sensations would be present. In this next 25 seconds or so of video, we see here, perhaps more clearly even, the coming together of all of the elements in a section of improvisation that helped knit the piece together. I'd just like to draw your attention too to David in the foreground, the way he is moving almost like the dancers as he draws. With the return of some vertical lines, we had our second use of pre-recorded video. Two of the dancers filmed and projected life-size, as if behind these lines, suggesting barriers or creating divisions in the space. And for the final section of this piece, David used a paintbrush and therefore a completely different application of paint to paper. This last section became more about the colour and how the intensity of the colour flooded the space, creating an almost underwater effect. And this last trio of dance was designed to pull together early elements of relationship and emotional states in a celebration of humanness, with all of its rough edges, encounters and disencounters, asking the question, what is a perfect world anyway?